Okay, we'll just wait a few minutes for everybody to make their way into the room, and then I'll introduce our next presenter, Susan Memmott from Blue Mountain City Council. She's our road traffic safety coordinator. Okay, so we'll get started. Susan is going to give us a little bit of a talk on what to do in emergencies as far as road safety is concerned, and she will be able to answer any questions that you may have at the end. If you wish to ask questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box and I will monitor those for Susan. If we don't get to them at the end, we can answer them and get back to you at some stage through our Get Ready Blue Mountains website. So take it away, Susan.
Okay, thanks very much, Beck, for that lovely introduction, and I hope everyone's been enjoying all the presenters so far, and I hope you can get something out of my presentation as well today. We're going to talk about road safety in terms of emergencies. So thinking about our driving behaviour and why is safe driving behaviour so important? So keeping yourself and others safe on the road. Being prepared and driving safely is essential for reducing your risk and others' risks of being in a crash, particularly in times of stress. You know, we're out there and we're sharing the road and we need to think about others. So today we'll talk about a few key things. So I'll talk a little bit about the stress response, ways that we can reduce our risks, what to do in a breakdown and what to do in a crash. You may or may not have been in any of those. So what to do in an emergency, and also how to behave on the road around emergency vehicles. All right, let's get into it. So the stress response, we've all experienced it. In an emergency, our fight or flight response, it can take over. So we know that that's happening. We have some physical indicators of fight or flight. Our pupils can dilate, our skin feels flushed or it could get pale. We've got a rapid heartbeat and breathing, a bit like doing a presentation today, a bit of trembling. Some of these or all of these might occur. Sometimes there's that feeling that you want to run away. And so this is our body's way of protecting us in times of emergency or high stress. So it's good to just think about that and how we respond in times of high stress, and think about it in terms of driving, because look, we may already consider ourselves to be experienced drivers. We've driven for years, we're confident, we're capable, but really stress can affect our driving choices on the road. Think about when you're feeling upset about something. Sometimes it can be harder to take in information, and we can be prone to erratic behaviour, poor decision making, and our body actually gets more fatigued when we're feeling really stressed out. So I guess the other thing to say is that driving, as we know, requires attention and it requires care. You need all your senses operating. And, operating a vehicle or a car or what have you, it's really a higher level function because we're operating a very complex vehicle. So these are just, this isn't exhaustive. This is just a few quick tips to reduce stress. So look, really the best thing to do is if you're really tired, fatigued or upset is actually to avoid driving. Giving yourself as much extra time as you can out on the road. And if you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed while driving, look, taking a few slow, deep breaths to, open up the diaphragm, in through the nose, out through the nose, nice and slow. Don't scrunch up while you're driving. Adjust your position, be comfortable, loosen your body, roll your shoulders, unclench your fists. Don't find yourself, gripping the steering wheel with, the old white knuckles. So look to also reduce your distractions. So of course, you shouldn't be driving with your phone on or using it, but, switching that off, maybe turning down, the music in the car, And another big one is avoiding conflict. So this isn't the time to have a family argument in the car or take up issues with your passengers or have a go at other drivers on the road. You really don't want to end up in some kind of, road rage scenario. So driving safely really is our top priority to avoid being in a crash or an accident. So just going to our next slide. So the other big one is thinking about reducing our risks around speed. So speed's actually, one of the biggest factors on crashes on the road. And, we say it time and time again, drive to the speed limit, drive to the posted speed limit, and also to the conditions. When the unexpected happens, how fast you're driving does really matter, whether it's an animal running out on the road, another driver doing something erratic near us, I guess sometimes drivers might feel that they're, it's okay to speed a little bit. I'm experienced, I'm in control, but, you can't ignore some of those factors outside of your control. So, it can be weather and other things. So being just a little bit over the speed limit, it can actually make that difference between being able to stop in time or not at all. And in a crash, any extra speed means extra impact or force, and we really want to prevent injuries and deaths on the road. That's super important. So another thing to really think about is fatigue. Sometimes we I think, underestimate fatigue and think, oh yeah, I'm a bit tired, but I'm okay. I can do it. And, fatigue crashes can happen anywhere really, like even close to home. So really, again, the optimal thing to do is not to drive while you're tired, getting plenty of rest, planning your trip and taking breaks if you're going on a long journey. We haven't, in lockdown, we haven't been driving as much. And, we haven't been doing those long drives. So that's something really to think about. We're more fatigued doing some of the regular stuff that we usually do. And if you've got someone else with you, sharing the driving is always good. And there is a really good website actually called testyourtiredself.com.au where you can go on, and it takes you through actually a series of questions and a few little activities that actually show you how tired you are. So I do recommend giving that a go at some point, even if before going on a holiday or a long trip. It's a really good little website to have a go of. So, the old stop, revive, survive is really important because, if you fall asleep at the wheel, you can't brake. Micro sleep doesn't enable us to stop. And really being awake for 17 hours, it does have that effect on performance. So it's similar to having a blood alcohol concentration level of 0.05. So something we often take for granted is seatbelts. So another way to reduce risk is making sure you buckle up. We know seatbelts keep us safe. In the 70s, when the laws were changed and seatbelts came in, they were mandatory, it really did make a drop in the road toll. So ensuring all your passengers are buckled up, and that's particularly important for the driver. They're responsible for making sure everyone's got their seatbelt on. Don't just think, oh, well, I'm just going down the road. Oh, we're just getting out of the way. I don't need to do it. We'll be right. But, it's not a good way to think. So the other thing is making sure your children are buckled up properly, that they've got the right child restraint, that it's fitted properly. Their safety is really important. They're small and they're vulnerable. And, we often recommend that car seats for kids, they shouldn't be more than 10 years old. And knowing if you got your car seat secondhand, making sure it actually hasn't been in a crash, even a small crash, because sometimes, that straps can be frayed or there can be little micro cracks in the plastic. So it's really important to know the history of that seat and for the seats to be, an Australian standard. So Very important to check your child restraints and making sure, kids aren't moving around in those seats. Don't leave it to the last minute. So when we're thinking about emergencies and things like that, when we're under stress, the last thing we need to do is have to sort out the child's car seat in the back. Council does we do, as part of our local government road safety program, actually have a free program. So for residents that need to get their child restraints checked or fitted. Before lockdown, we had some quarterly days where people could come and get those checked and fitted. At the moment, we're running a voucher system. So I can be contacted at council. You can send Beck through her email and I can get back to you about getting a voucher, and our child restraint fitters at this point are very experienced, and they will come out to you to get those seats checked or fitted. So it's a really great service. The only thing you pay for is, if you've got some hardware or new straps or something like that. But they're happy to answer all your questions and adjust your kids as they need to be. So it's a really important service. So there's a great website to also look at, childcarseats.com.au. It goes through the laws. You can compare types of seats, and it gives you heaps of information about seats. So, and the ages and stages around the seats. So that's a really good website. Also, I think it's important to just reinforce this one about keeping your vehicle maintained. As we're saying, as I've said, we've just been in a period of lockdown for, 15 weeks, feels like forever, but we may not have been, unless you're driving for work, you may not have been driving as much. So it's really important, I think, at this time of year to make sure, that you've got your vehicle serviced, do a bit of health checklist. The indicator, brakes, lights and fog lights are working. Your tyres are properly inflated and aren't worn or cracked. Don't forget about that spare setting in the boot. Don't ignore the warning lights on your dash, and that your exhaust is looking healthy. There's no visible smoke emissions coming out of there. And here's some more tips. So no scratches, chips or cracks in your windscreen or mirrors. You don't want those to become a bigger issue than they might look. Checking your wipers and washers are working. Engine oil and fluid levels are all at recommended levels, and there's no oil leaks when the car is parked. Again, what we just spoke about, the seat belts and child car seats are fitted correctly and adjusted correctly, not twisted when they're worn. And of course that you're not sitting on empty with your fuel, that you've got adequate fuel levels. Yes, we all think, oh yeah, but I know all this, but it's surprising sometimes when we kind of let some of these things kind of go. And think about a few things in terms of emergencies that might be helpful to carry in your vehicle. So, this isn't an exhaustive list, but having a torch, first aid kit, maybe some high vis, water, an emergency woolen blanket. Some other things to think about in terms of our safety when we're actually travelling on the road is having a safe distance. So what we call the crash avoidance space. Keeping, it sounds like, common sense, keeping sufficient distance between a vehicle travelling in front, so you safely avoid a collision. So, think about all those tailgaters that you see out there on the road. It's really important to have a safe following distance, and they do vary because it depends on the conditions, the type of vehicle, if you've got a big vehicle that you're driving, and also your travel speed. So as a general rule, when we follow a vehicle, the driver should travel 3 seconds behind the vehicle in front to provide sufficient time to avoid a crash. And that's what it looks like in real life in a picture. So you can see there's a few vehicles there that are a bit closer than the example. So, the 3 second gap, as I just already said, it changes depending on your speed. It also, depends on state of the road, whether it's raining and so forth. The faster, because, it's logical, the faster you're going, the longer it takes to stop and avoid a crash. And there's that combined effects of reaction and braking times in dry conditions. And there's a little bit of a list there of sort of estimated, vehicle space between vehicles there. So at 60 kilometres an hour, you need at least 50 metres of space, right up to 80 kilometres an hour, 67, going up to 110 on a freeway, 92 metres. So I've, myself, when I'm out there on the M4, I've, witnessed so many people driving incredibly close at very high speeds. It's quite scary. So whether or not you've ever had a breakdown or not, it's still worthwhile having a think about what to do. So the first thing to think about is to activate your hazard lights, finding a safe spot to pull over if you can, like a hard shoulder or in a breakdown lane, positioning your vehicle as far away from other traffic as possible. And, ideally staying in your vehicle with your seatbelt on and calling roadside assistance or the NRMA. If you do have to get out of your vehicle, like always checking for traffic, leaving your vehicle from the safest kind of side and away from the traffic, especially at night. Try to avoid crossing the road. We don't need any kind of pedestrian crashes as well. Standing clear of the road and moving behind, a safety barrier if that's around, if it's safe to do so. And the whole thing about, changing tyres, don't attempt to change a tyre unless it's, totally safe, that your car's completely against the traffic. So what about crashes? The key thing is to stop after a crash. You should always turn off your ignition if your car's still working. It reduces the risk of fire. Turning on your hazard lights if you're able. Calling an ambulance or police on 000 if anyone is injured or unfortunately killed in a crash. It's mandatory to help anyone injured in a crash. So the driver in a crash must stop and give help to anyone who's injured. And it's an offence not to stop and assist. The other thing to do is to exchange details. And if you're involved in a crash, you must give the other person or people involved your name and address and your vehicle rego number. And also if the name and address of the owner of the vehicle, if it's not, if you're not actually the owner. So when do you need to call the police? So police attend and investigate crashes when, if someone's trapped, if they're killed or injured, if any driver is believed to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, if a person fails to stop or exchange information at the scene, if the police need to be out there to direct traffic or deal with hazards, if a bus or truck needs to be towed away from the scene as well. So you must always give police at the crash scene your driver's license details, any details of the vehicles involved, your name and address, information about any witnesses or other drivers involved if you can. You don't have to call police to attend a crash if there's no injuries or vehicles don't need to be towed. Sometimes, if someone's involved in a crash, it's not till later they might actually realise that they're injured or they need treatment. So it's really good to report the crash to the nearest police station or the police assistance line on 131 444 if that happens. So, and if police don't attend the crash scene, you must report the crash as soon as possible within 24 hours. If the vehicle's towed, there's property damage, animals are injured, or you're unable to provide your details to the other driver for whatever reason. So it's good to make contact with police. So here's a little bit of advice on travelling during emergencies. So it's always really important to follow the advice on travel from authorities and emergency services. You know, staying off the road as much as you can, avoiding driving during emergencies, keeping the roads clear. So there's those things that we get told around not driving in floodwaters, and avoid driving in, locations where there's controlled burning and bushfires are actually burning. You should only drive during bushfire as a last resort, or if instructed to do so by emergency services. So the other classic thing is, and you see it all the time, particularly in weather events where people don't put their lights on. So please be seen to other drivers and put your lights on. And also keeping up to date with road closures and advice. There's the livetraffic.com website, and also there's an app. And, having ABC radio on, they're the emergency broadcaster. So what about how we drive around emergency service vehicles? So it's really important to give way to emergency service vehicles, keeping clear. If you're in the way of an emergency vehicle, move out of the way as soon as you can safely. Move into that left lane or into the shoulder or breakdown lane. Drivers on both sides of the roads should be prepared to move out of the path of approaching emergency vehicles. And if you're stopped, remaining stopped until it's safe to proceed, even if the traffic light is green. If you're not stopped, slowing down and stopping if it's necessary to avoid a collision with an emergency vehicle. So it's also really important not to cut in front of them. And as we know, with fire trucks and so forth, emergency vehicles are large and they can take up plenty of space. Like trucks, like regular kind of trucks, they've got blind spots. So we need to be really careful about that. Being cautious when we see, flashing lights or hearing sirens. Emergency vehicles travelling, when they've got the audible sirens or flashing lights, are responding to something urgent. We know that. They're not actually required to follow the road rules as long as it's safe for them to do so. Another important thing around preventing crashes with emergency service vehicles. So, crashes with a fire truck or an ambulance and so forth, it's not only impacting, the people involved in the crash, but those whom the emergency services were travelling to actually go and help. So things not to do: don't move your vehicle suddenly and without thinking. Don't slam on your brakes or stop suddenly if you hear or see emergency vehicles. Don't speed up to follow the emergency vehicle to get a clear run through the traffic. I have seen that happen. Don't slow down or stop to take a look at a crash, like they don't really need an audience. Don't drive too close to like stationary emergency vehicles. They might be positioned close to the road, and maybe all those emergency staff are actually in and around vehicles, and so we want to give them as much space as we can. So try not to obstruct the traffic. You don't want to be the cause of another incident. It might not be a great idea to play extremely loud music. That's inhibiting your ability to hear what's going on around you. And, people often spot people actually are in their headphones as well, which isn't great, and it doesn't make you alert on the road. So in the last couple of years, the emergency services rule was brought into effect after a bit of a trial for a year. So the thinking around that is that it's there to look after those who are looking after us. And so, slowing down and giving emergency vehicle space is really important. So the rule applies when we're passing a stationary tow truck or a breakdown assist vehicle like an NRMA vehicle when they're flashing their yellow lights. And it also applies to emergency vehicles, ambulance, fire trucks, police, SES, and so forth. So after trialling it, this is what Transport have come up with. So on on high speed roads, a speed limit of 90 kilometres or more. So, things like the M4, slowing down safely to a speed that's reasonable for the circumstance. It's not always easy to slow down to a really, really super low speed, but slowing down is really important. On lower speeds roads, so with a speed limit of 80 kilometres or less, so like our local roads in the Blue Mountains or or the Great Western Highway, slowing down to 40 kilometres is what you need to do. So the other idea is that motorists must provide sufficient space between their vehicles and emergency services and breakdown assist. So now I'm going to actually try and play, oops, I'll just go back. Just going to check if this is playing here. I'm not sure if we're getting sound here. Okay, so I'm just going to screen share to YouTube because I'd like to actually play this rule. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay, just going over to YouTube. Not finding it. Okay.
While Susan's looking for that, we'll just see, has anybody got any questions that they would like to put into the question box for Susan to have a look at once we've finished?
Okay.
It's not working?
Oh, just one moment. I'm hoping to get it happening.
These are some of the technical glitches that I'm sure everybody has had to deal with during COVID and our lockdown and working from home situations.
Go. Can we see YouTube?
Yes, we can. Thank you,
Okay,
Susan.
thank you. Thank you. All right.
A road rule has changed for everyone's safety. When you see the flashing lights of tow trucks, breakdown assistance or emergency vehicles stopped on the road and the speed limit of the road is 90 kilometres per hour or more, slow down safely to a speed that is reasonable for the circumstances and move over to provide as much space as possible between your vehicle and the stopped vehicle, as well as any people who may be on the road. On a multi-lane road, this means moving over out of the lane next to the stopped vehicles if safe to do so. You may only increase your speed once you have passed all vehicles and people involved. On roads where the speed limit is 80 kilometres per hour or less, slow down to 40 kilometres per hour until you've passed all vehicles and people involved. These requirements apply to vehicles travelling in both directions, unless the road is divided by a median strip. This rule applies when you're passing stationary police, ambulance, fire and rescue, rural fire service, state emergency service, volunteer rescue association, traffic emergency patrol, or commander vehicles displaying flashing blue or red lights. The rule now also applies when passing stationary breakdown assistance vehicles and tow trucks displaying flashing yellow lights.
Okay, I hope that you all found that useful. I have a last slide, but it's basically a list of some of the links that I talked about through the presentation, and it's also linked to that YouTube. So I think that that will be provided at the end of today's sessions in the resource list. So I'm just going to have a look and see if you've got any questions, and hopefully I can answer them.
Yeah, we do have one there, Susan.
Okay.
In the event of an instruction during an approaching bushfire to leave immediately, and there are too many vehicles, to organise streets in the mountains with a staggered approach to leaving, as it seems there could be a bumper-to-bumper issue, which we often, as we know, this happens regularly across the mountains in all areas, with many roads being one road in, one road out.
Yeah.
Is there any instructions to turn left or right onto the highway depending on the direction of the fire? I think that's something that we would definitely have to take on notice. I don't know of anything.
Yes, I'm not sure that I'm in a position to be able to answer that, because I mean, I'm just wondering if emergency services like police or RFS would be directing travel. I don't feel I can give you an answer there.
Yeah, that would be something that would be decided by the agency in control of, and police.
Yes,
police are in charge of all evacuations. So I can take that question on notice from our question asker and get back to her with information. But at this point, there is nothing that I'm aware of in any of our emergency planning that specifically says that will be something that is going to occur. And it would be dependent on the day as to what was happening and the situation of the incident as to what instructions would be given. So I will have to get back to you with that one.
It's a great question. So thank you, Liz, who asked that question. So yeah, thanks for listening to my presentation today and bearing with the technology. So I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming along, Susan. We're going to break for some lunch now. So our next session starts back at, I think it was 1:15. So we've got a half an hour for break for lunch. So yeah, sometime around 1:15, we'll start the next round of sessions. And thank you very much, Susan, for coming in and giving us all of that wonderful information.
Okay, thank you.